Our next presenter is the founder of devrelate.io and a board member of Open Sourcing Mental Health, osmhhelp.org. His name is PJ Hagerty, and the title of his presentation is The Pony Express and How Technology Moves Fast. It's all yours, PJ.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Thank you to everyone who's here and everybody who's been hanging out at Crafthub. It's been a wonderful experience. I hope you're all having a good time, and I hope that continues through this talk. So this is my talk. It's about the Pony Express, but before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about me. As John mentioned, my name is PJ. I work at a company called devrelate.io. I do developer and community relations as a service. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But I'm a developer advocate, which what that means is I get to travel the world. I get to spend time, with people, learning about technology, doing other things. I also do a lot of karaoke. I used to be a hockey coach. I'm a dad. At one point in time, I did kindly let my 11-year-old keynote RubyConf. For that video and to see how terrifying it is to be on stage with an 11-year-old, just look up Katie Hagerty RubyConf 2013. But that was a long time ago. In addition, I'm also a musician. I'm married to a wonderful woman. We like to travel the world together, and luckily this is the job to do it with. As mentioned, I work at devrelate.io. It's a company that I founded to provide developer relation, developer advocacy, community management services to people who need it. So if you feel like it's something that your company might benefit from, either short-term or long-term, please check us out at devrelate.io. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of history with this talk. Many people who watch Westerns and modern takes on the romantic American Western movement believe in certain things. The good guys always wore white hats. They always won the day. Everything west of the Mississippi was lawless. Some bank robbers weren't such bad people. And the Pony Express was how the mail got delivered. To many people, these are facts, straight up facts, dearly held beliefs that have been allowed to become the stories we build other stories upon. But if we look closely, there's some holes in this story, some really big ones. Before even the Civil War, some folks decided to head out to seek their fortunes. The United States was trying to achieve a goal called Manifest Destiny, which was expanding from the East Coast where the colonies started to the West Coast where California exists. For some people, this meant opportunity, be it to find some farmland, to establish new freedoms, or to find gold lying in them their heels all across America. When prospectors found gold in the California coast, towns began to pop up all along the coast. It was necessary for people, both the companies who owned the land or paid prospectors, families of these adventurous souls, pioneers trying to eke out a living. They needed to get their mail, and they needed to get it as quickly as possible. These remote locations were growing. Between 1848 and 1860, the population of California grew to 380,000 people. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but when you start at about 15 and you get to 380,000, you can see that's a lot of growth in a lot of time. We could talk about hockey stick growth because people in California love that, but that's not what we're focused on in this talk. With very few ways to get information from one end of the country to the other, a new solution had to be found. Some of you will immediately say, well, PJ, what about the railroads? Hold your questions to the end because I'm getting to the railroads right now. Railroads could get messages like a good portion of the way across the continent, but they couldn't make it much further than Missouri. For those of you who don't know U.S. geography, that's about a third of the way, maybe almost halfway, but not quite halfway. When the United States gained New Mexico and Arizona as states in 1853, we could only just start to consider bringing the coast together via mail. And let's be honest, the railroad back then was no guarantee of speed or safety. Heck, the railroad in the United States is no guarantee of speed or safety today. It was kind of like having a server in a closet being maintained by someone with a general idea of how to run Linux or Ubuntu and making their own Cat5 cables with a crimper. And they were all entwined in unsafe ways throughout this closet. And they were all one color, so you couldn't even track anything. And there was no ventilation and there was no door. So unsafe, unstable, prone to robbery, severe security flaws. The railroad couldn't be the right answer for this growing country. Now, just to add all of that problem, we have these aggravating edge cases, a small inconvenience in the idea of who is doing all the work. Well, some people wanted to bring the country together. Others kind of wanted to remain on top of the pile by oppressing other human beings. War was on the horizon. If we wanted to continue to be successful and to move forward as a country, we needed a way to communicate quickly. On the eve of the American Civil War, the Pony Express was born. A network was built. Riders, generally young, often orphans or escaped slaves, would help. They'd be hired. They would ride like the wind. The Pony Express began on April 3rd, 1860. April 3rd, 1860. I want you to keep that in mind for a couple minutes. Suddenly, you could get a message from New York City to San Francisco in just 10 days. A miracle in modern communication. Unbelievable. Now, if we've learned anything from the movies about the Pony Express in that era, it's about how ubiquitous and long-lasting it was. It seems like every Western, be it a novel or a film, whatever, has some reference to the Pony Express. You know, the guy riding into town with the message at the last minute. Oh, thank goodness it's here. There have been movies and television shows dedicated to these brave riders and their horses, flying across the plains, outwitting dangerous animals, bandits, and Native Americans who were kind of pissed off because we kept taking their land and their territories, and maybe they were probably right to be angry with us. The Pony Express, a paragon of innovation in April of 1860. However, this great technique for moving messages coast to coast was outdated after a mere year and a half. 18 months. 18 months is not a very long time. The needs of the people and the speed of technology overtook these Western riders. So instead of innovation, the Pony Express was really just a stopgap method. And it would have remained a footnote in American history were it not for these so-called penny dreadfuls that raised the Pony Express rider to heroic status. A simple device at the right time, a time when war was starting, a railroad was being built, and communication needed to move faster than ever before. All this culminated in the end of the Pony Express after a mere 18 months of operation. That's it, 18 months. As a side note, think of the telegraph and the Pony Express the next time you have a conversation about machines replacing people. Automation is not a new issue. When's the last time you tipped an elevator operator? If the Pony Express was a stopgap, how long did the telegraph last? Funny you should ask. Perhaps you've heard of a British person, sometimes called the father of modern computer science. In World War II, about 80 years after the Civil War in the United States, Alan Turing was in England trying to decipher telegraph messages that were encoded using the above machine. Known as Enigma, it was a way to encrypt and decrypt messages sent via telegraph. So some pieces of technology last a long time. Others fade quickly or have limited use and disappear. We have this all the time in the application development world. Unless all of you plan to share your thoughts of this talk on your Bebo page or your live journal, I think you understand what I'm saying. And that's just social media. So let's take a look at some of the things that have lasting power and see how much lasting power they actually have. Maybe we can speculate on what has staying power and what's more of a flash in the pan. By the way, if you've ever heard the term flash in the pan before, that is literally an 1849 gold prospecting reference, because prospectors would try to sift through the dirt and they'd hope for a flash in the pan to see that they had struck gold. So fun fact, you can bring that up at dinner later tonight with your family. So let's start with a philosophy lesson, which means that I have to, first of all, because it's philosophy, look off into the distance and be a thought leader. You're welcome for that. Anyway, there's no shortage of the philosophies around technology. They are not a new phenomenon. Whether it's the idea that mainframe computing is the only true computer science solution, to the idea that DevOps can be certified and assigned as a team. There have never been a shortage of ideologies that accompany the work we do. Most philosophies are really meant as best practices to allow you to work or build a better workflow, easily produce better applications, or run better networks or data centers. On the earth, in the cloud, wherever you're doing it, they're basically a set of best practices. Some are only suggestions because something worked on my machine, so it must work for everyone else. Let's take a look at some of the most common modern era philosophies and see what the strengths are and where the pitfalls might be. Waterfall. So this is actually Just a fun fact. This is a picture of Niagara Falls. That's going to become important later. I live in Buffalo, New York. Niagara Falls is not too far. I drive up there on my motorcycle regularly. It takes about 20 minutes. That's just I'm not bragging there. That's just to let you know that it's not exciting for some people. So anyway, waterfall is probably one of the most well-known and much maligned development methods in the world today. How many of you have been involved in an organization using the waterfall technique? You don't have to raise your hands. I can't see you anyway. But if you want to raise your hand personally where you are, you go right ahead. For those not in the know, here's the definition of waterfall. I'm going to use my special definition voice. The waterfall model is a relatively linear, sequential design approach for certain areas of engineering design. In software development, it tends to be among the less iterative and flexible approaches, as progress flows in largely one direction, downwards like a waterfall, through the phases of conception, initiation, analysis, design, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Who writes these things? Anyway, pretty thorough for an idea developed in the 1950s. So we're talking about 10 years after Turing was dealing with the telegraph, and we're now trying to find engineering techniques in computer science. So almost literally, this guy starts to build modern computer science as a concept, and we immediately say, you know what, we need something to wrap our heads around this. Let's get a philosophy to go. Innovative for its time, though even shortly thereafter, people began to see the flaws. Waterfall is dead simple. As your programming teams began to build applications for businesses or scientific inquiry, we needed to establish a way to do it in an organized way, something that made sense. And a lot of this came out of the engineering industry, especially the aerospace engineering industry that was just kind of burgeoning at the time. So is it in any way surprising that our first thought was to take a page from modern manufacturing techniques of the time, 1950s, and apply them to computer science? To build a car, you establish requirements. You design it using those requirements. You build the car. You test to see if it works, drive around the factory a little bit. And maybe you do some maintenance once it's out in the world. Easy, right? Why wouldn't we want to work in the same rigid way as that when it comes to technology? Well, the problem with this philosophy, like so many first ideas, like the Pony Express, is its short-sightedness. What works in one industry does not necessarily work for another. In a few minutes, we'll discuss the agile methodology, much of which focuses on the concept of lean, an idea brought over from Japan's car manufacturers. Now, there's a difference on how these two things were adopted. For agile, we borrowed. Waterfall, we just took the whole damn thing. Waterfall has no iteration. It has no feedback loop. There's no structure for movement outside of the specs. Most people know when an organization is not flexible, that spells doom. Waterfall was a doomed philosophy before it got off the ground. Yet parts of it are still used today in large-scale corporations, believe it or not. Now, to exemplify this, you might notice the picture on your screen looks like a little bit of water falling over rocks. This is also Niagara Falls. In the 1960s, to prevent erosion, a bunch of engineers got together and said, well, when we want to reinforce a building, we take that iron rebar and we put it through the cement, and that reinforces the building. Let's do the same thing to prevent the erosion of Niagara Falls. Now, what had happened was, you have 65,000 gallons of water per minute going over Niagara Falls. So in order to work with it, they had to stop it, but they had to stop it at a certain point because we also get all of our power from Niagara Falls. It's a very complicated process. So they did it. They stopped the falls and they drove in these iron bars, like really long iron bars. And we thought, okay, this will stop the erosion because you can see all the rocks at the bottom there. It's very clear that there's a lot going on. Then they began the falls again. What do you think they found out happened? Well, now you had these big, ugly rusty iron bars sticking out of the stone because it continued to erode, because that's what waterfalls do. They erode. Eventually, they stop the falls again, take the iron bars out, and can let the erosion continue naturally. Sometimes it's best not to mess around with nature. That's what we learned. So let's talk a little bit more about agile. Agile is more modern. It's more widely accepted. It's an easy to follow philosophy in the world of tech. While the word conjures up images that may or may not work along the ideas of the philosophy, let's define it before we make any decisions. Agile is an approach to software development under which requirements and solutions evolve through the collaborative collaborative effort of self-organizing cross-functional teams and their customers or end users. It advocates adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, and continual improvement, and it encourages rapid and flexible response to change. This sounds amazing after Waterfall. Self-organizing teams, iterative development, customer input. What could possibly go wrong? Agile is the space age solution for the space age. Everything we're looking for is here: iteration, collaboration, flexibility. At the advent of Agile, which was, anyone want to guess, believe it or not, the 1970s, there still wasn't much need for adherence to a software development philosophy. Most software is built in and for large-scale corporations. Computers weren't common in homes. Even entertainment systems like ColecoVision and Atari were only coming into being. Agile was kind of a sleepy philosophy for a while. Then, as we start to see more modern application development and deployment, and we start to see people using computers on a more regular basis in the 90s, it began to take off. This is when we began to see Martin Fowler's manifesto on Agile. We couldn't just apply normal manufacturing techniques to build and deploy software. We needed real-world ways that applied to the problem at hand, something modern and different. Now, Agile is an amazing modern workflow, absolutely stunning, with a few caveats. And the issues with Agile are really with the peripherals of Agile. Things like Scrum, Kanban, Raft. These add-ons that aren't really necessary and don't really contribute to the success of the team. Agile literally means flexible. The word literally means flexible. If your team can work without the overhead of complicated niceties like daily stand-ups or Raft teams, Agile will probably work for you. Believe it or not, even stand-ups are not part of the Agile philosophy. As with any philosophy, though, zealotry, strict adherence to the tenets of what people believe it stagnates growth. If you need to follow rules as strictly as possible, that's not very flexible, is it? It's not very agile. As a great bonus, though, Agile led us to something new: DevOps. So, DevOps is a set of software development practices that combine software development, dev, and information technology operation, ops, to shorten the system's development life cycle while delivering features, fixes, and updates frequently in close alignment with business objectives. Different disciplines collaborate, making quality everyone's job. Personally, I love this definition, not only because it's like really clear and makes sense, but also because it finishes like a weird commercial, like making quality everyone's job. I mean, really, it sounds like something you'd hear on the radio or, in some sort of inspirational video. But it's really what other philosophies are striving for as far as how a tech team should function. All the best parts of Agile, the few good ideas that we got from Waterfall, applied to all teams across an organization. Everyone is part of the conversation. Everyone is responsible. This is our modern answer on how best to deliver software. Mobile, web, OSs, doesn't matter what you're doing. We've learned from the past. This is what we have. This is our most up-to-date philosophy. DevOps, according to some, should be the end-all, be-all of development. We introduced the concepts of interactions with developers and ops or IT. We added in the folks from QA and testing. What a great cycle. And what do we focus on? Automation, the exact thing that killed the Pony Express. So DevOps goals, according to some people, is to automate as much as possible to remove risk. I mean, again, that's really what happened in the Pony Express. We needed to move messages faster. So instead of doing it manually on horseback, we automated it. Not only did we automate to the point of putting it through the telegraph, we made up a whole language. Samuel Morse made up a whole language of clicks and dashes specifically to move the messages faster. And people understood that. We built a system that made the old system less useful. Makes one wonder if part of the point of DevOps is to make DevOps unnecessary. So, like all theories, DevOps is great in theory. Everyone works happily together now because we're all employing DevOps, right? All problems are resolved and we all get along and the world is at peace and the applications work perfectly. DevOps, it works 60% of the time, every time. So like Waterfall and Agile before it, DevOps has one major downfall. It's based on a perfect world scenario. In a perfect world, all these things work. When faced with the reality of organizations functioning at modern speeds, some of these things start to fall down. The real basis of DevOps is communication. Communication is the key to making it work. And that's one thing that we as human beings are not the greatest at. So this doesn't mean we should abandon hope, all ye who DevOps, but we need to see where the philosophies work and where they don't. We need to take our organization's perspective into account to achieve goals. We need to be critical of the things we do and find what parts don't work and replace them. All things in tech should be in constant evolution, not an end goal. If you've ever written a piece of software that's done, I'd love to talk to you and tell you why you're wrong. So let's move beyond the philosophies. Let's talk about some methodologies for how the infrastructure of our team works. Like, we need to build things, whether in ops or dev, these ideas need to come through. So let's talk a little bit about different development ideas. And we'll start with test-driven development. This is the concept that everything you build, software or hardware, application or infrastructure, database, whatever, must be thoroughly tested before going out into the world. This is a great idea, except for that little nagging thing that it takes nearly twice as long to build anything. Additionally, since you never really know how people will use a thing once it's out in the world, it can be needlessly pedantic. So maybe behavior-driven development is better. So unlike test-driven development, behavior-driven development is based on how users interact with, and let's be completely honest, how they break the things that we build. Forward thinking, right? So let's see how users do things and build what we need based on that information. Brilliant. Less time spent than TDD, right? Maybe. But it also leaves a huge possibility for failing over and over again. Luckily, from the BDD movement, and by the way, you might notice that BDD has a little bit of waterfall sprinkled into it, because what do? You release and you find out how it works. We could get into the whole concept of like A/B testing and all that, learning to change and adopt, and then grabbing from DevOps culture the concept of chaos engineering to sprinkle it in and cover up the fact that it's waterfall, but it's still a little bit waterfall. This is great. It's behavior-based. So even out of misguided philosophies, we can cull some good. Behavior-driven development needs to happen. Test-driven development also needs to happen. And let me understand, I'm not siloing these things. You kind of need to do all these things together. But let's talk about what people actually do. So what really goes on in the real world? In every organization, every team, what really happens is shame-driven development. People only write as many tests as they can get away with, so the next developer doesn't think they skipped it all together. The ops person only takes their time setting up physical hardware, so it seems their time was worth it and that they made something that makes sense. An SRE, a site reliability engineer, holds everything together with duct tape and bubblegum, but writes documentation for a well-running system. Whether DevOps or Agile or what have you, we generally build things so we won't be shamed by the next person to see it. This is the truth of where most things lie and most things live in the tech world today. Kind of like how much the Pony Express was built good enough for what the United States needed at the time. We innovate, but often the focus is on a minimal viable product, a minimal viable setup. So let's look at those words, minimal and viable. Minimal, viable. Just the languages that we develop in come with philosophies and ideals that matter to some people, but some seem to be less and less important as time marches on. Compiled languages versus non-compiled. Open source versus the enterprise. Languages like C++ or .NET. That's what I mean by enterprise. We're seeing now a return to functional programming while seeing the growth of JavaScript tools, the explosion of JavaScript tools, I think would be more accurate, focused on building single-page web applications. Do we need a library for every single-page web app? I don't think so. These choices lead to things not needing a proper server, deploying to a GitHub page with Jekyll or Middleman or Gatsby, using serverless. You don't even need an ops team for that, right? But these aren't innovations so much as they're iteration on the same circle of concepts. We aren't building new things. We're just solving the same problems in different ways over and over and over again. We strive to keep moving forward. DevOps is our current Pony Express. Will it last longer? Well, I mean, not literally. It's already lasted longer than 18 months. DevOps has been around for about 10, 15 years. Will it become the telegraph of this philosophical generation? When we think of the word innovation, we think of building something new, discovering new territory. We've done that by bringing teams together toward the common goal. DevOps took us a step further by getting rid of those accoutrements of Agile, all the rules, and saying, hey, we all have the same goal. Let's work on it. Let's work together to reach it. That's innovation. That's riding to outlast the competition. Like I said, technology moves fast. We need to learn to adapt and innovate if we hope to keep it up. So we see things come and go. We see innovation built on failure. Philosophies grow from simple adopted ideas, concepts borrowed from somewhere else, retrofitted to our needs. We see what was the best solution today might not be the best solution tomorrow. It could be outdated. When adopting DevOps culture and ideals, we seek to find the best solution for our teams and our development and our ops environments. We should never accept these ideas blindly. We must question every step of the way. Now, I've been an open source developer for years. I needed to be convinced of that. And I'm a little ashamed that I have to admit that now, but it's true. In the beginning, I thought open source was a lark. It was a fun to do. It wasn't like something that you would do regularly. But, at the time I was embarrassed to admit I was a Visual Fox Pro developer. But it was the right solution for the right time. Using Microsoft technologies made sense for what we were doing at the time. But times have changed. There's so many opportunities and so many well-built, secure systems out there that we adapt and we innovate and we overcome. I have another talk that talks about how open source has changed in so many ways. It's not the open source you remember, but it very much demonstrates the idea that innovation is what drives a good community and a good set of tools. So at some point in time, there's a young man on a horse racing across the hills of California to deliver a message. He never read it. That wasn't his job. And if we're completely honest, he probably couldn't. His job was to deliver. That message read, "Telegraph service reaches San Francisco. Pony Express retired." Every point of our job in tech is to innovate and build. We continue to do so knowing that the future is our goal, not the nearby goal. If we focus on making things that work, making things that function, making things that are valuable to our customers, minimal valuable products, minimal valuable options, then we can focus on making a better place like we all say that we want to do. With that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, PJ. Man, I love that presentation. I really did. I learned a lot as a non-programmer, non-IT kind of person. I learned a lot. So this whole concept of how development of applications evolved through the years, and I enjoyed the slides a lot too. Biggest takeaway for me was flash in the pan.
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned that, and a lot of people really like it hits it like, wow, I've used that phrase my whole life and I've never had any idea what it meant. That was kind of the inspiration for the talk in the beginning. I was thinking about, flash in the pan, where's that come from? Oh, prospectors. And then I started thinking about the Pony Express. I was like, Pony Express was such a huge thing. And I looked and I was like, 18 months. That's all it was 18 months. One of my favorite TV shows as a kid was a show called Young Riders that was just about kids who rode for the Pony Express. And it gave you this idea that these people, the show lasted for 3 or 4 years. That's longer than the Pony Express lasted.
Yeah, exactly. And you're absolutely right. Virtually in every Western, there's the Pony Express rider or the stagecoach comes into town.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we do have a question for you.
Yeah.
And this is from Anonymous. Is all technology doomed to be replaced by something newer?
I don't think I'd use the term doomed. Unless Anonymous, sure. Anonymous, if you're asking me this question from your Palm Pilot PDA and not from an iPhone or an Android phone, yes, all technology is going to be replaced. That's how it works. That's how innovation works. We have to move forward. If we're all still using Windows 3.1 or the original, Norton Commander as our operating systems, and I would say no. What was the need? We didn't need to move forward. But I think the idea is that we want to build things that are better than they were before. I think a lot of companies and a lot of organizations have these philosophies or even mission statements where they say, we want to make the world a better place. Sure. We all do. That's super appreciated. We should do that. And it's a great concept, but you have to ask yourself, is a new build going to be what makes the world a better place? Is the next piece of technology we build actually doing things to improve people's lives? When I was studying computer science, I also studied anthropology. because I knew that one of those things would get me a job that made money, and the other thing was really awesome. So in studying anthropology, one thing you learn is the word technology actually means tools that make humans' lives easier. So if each piece of technology we make is making our lives easier, then I don't think the word doomed comes into play here. But yes, every piece of technology we make is built to do something different. It's built to make something a little bit better than it was last time, make battery life last longer, make it easier for us to communicate with each other. I'm going to use another example here. If we had never moved on from the mobile technology of just regular cell phones, my mother-in-law, who is deaf, would not be able to communicate with her brother who lives in Sweden. She lives here in the US flawlessly using sign language and using FaceTime on the iPhone for free. Doesn't cost them anything as long as they're both in Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. Technology needs to move forward. So I don't think it's a doomed thing, but yeah, I think technology does replace itself quite often.
Okay. And Anonymous has a follow-up question for you. There are projects where waterfall is still desirable, no place for iteration. For example, the Mars rover. Do you feel we are always leaping forward, or is this sometimes just hype?
I would say that, the Mars rover is a piece of technology that's a little bit different from application development. That's like in the talk, I'm really focusing on application development. I think that there's value in a lot of things that we forget. I mentioned during the talk that I was a Visual Fox Pro developer. When we changed to Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails is a programming language that uses model view controller. At the time, people, and this is the early 2000s, people were like, oh man, model view controller, how revolutionary, how crazy. Model view controller is a programming concept from 1975. Like it wasn't new. So I think that waterfall has some valuable concepts. There are things that we can take from it that prove value. And like I said towards the end, you need to figure out what works best for your team. There's lots of teams that work really well in successful organizations that are applying waterfall. And that's okay, as long as you know how to manage it and as long as it's the thing that works best for you. The one thing that I don't like to see is when people are like, well, we use waterfall because that's always the way we've done it here. And they don't look at other opportunities. That's what I feel is what really is missing sometimes.
Thank you. I have a question. Maybe it's like I said, I'm not a programmer. I just, do you think that the applications that are being designed today and implemented and put out on are as robust as they were, say, 10 years ago?
No, no. I feel like there's a lot of, I'm going to get into a bit of a rant here, John. A lot of the applications that are built today are money grabs. Quite frankly, they're not built as strong. They are scaffolded with, some nice window dressing, and so many of them are not built in a way that is structured to be beneficial. I'll put it that way. They are structured to make a bunch of money and disappear. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me to see that the things that have lasted. Like I thought that about Twitter when Twitter first came out. Twitter has now been around for 12, 15 years. And I use it every day still. I know not everybody does, and it's a toxic place, and I'm not going to change anybody's mind about that. But still, it's a way for people to communicate that they never thought they'd have before. And that's amazing. But, I also see, at the time, shortly after Twitter came out, someone developed an app called Yo. Yo is basically Twitter, except the only message you could send to each other was the word yo. What value does that have? And you see little things like that. There are things that will always catch on and not always be the best. I mean, we had VHS tapes when we were young, and that was not the best format. Beta was actually better, but marketing wins out. I think you see that a lot with apps. So they're not as robust. They're not as strong as they used to be. But the ones that stick around for longer periods of time, those are the ones that are built on a good structure.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming in. I will remind the audience that PJ, you're up on Hopin or for a while, aren't you? Or you can
I should be
Slido messages. So if anybody wants to follow up on something, then you can put it up on Slido or Hopin, and PJ will get it, and he will.
And I should say if it's after the conference too, just hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Asplenic, ASPLENIC. My DMs are always open. So if something occurs to you 2 or 3 days from now, did PJ say that? feel free to drop me a line.
Okay. So PJ, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.